Hey friend, welcome back to the YouTube channel for the Renaissance English History Podcast. I am your host, Heather. I've been podcasting on Tudor England with my show since 2009, making it the original Tudor History Podcast. This channel, of course, is where I put all of my episodes from all of my shows, as well as tons of extra content like this video right here. Today, we are going to talk about the marriage of Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville. It's one of those very famous marriages that changed the course of history. So we're going to talk about how Edward met Elizabeth, who Elizabeth was, whether the marriage was valid, the reaction to the marriage, all of the things about the marriage. Before we get started, though, just your friendly reminder that if you are not already subscribed to this channel and you want to see more Tudor history in your YouTube feed, who doesn't? Go ahead and also Plantagenet history too, I should say, because this is Plantagenet, although of course it affected Tudor history, so you could call it Tudor history, but it's Plantagenet. Anyway, either way, if you want more of that in your YouTube feed, go ahead and hit subscribe now so you never miss a video that I put out. So you know how kings are supposed to marry for politics, secure an alliance, bring in a tidy dowry, ideally avoid marrying someone whose family fought against you in a civil war? Well, Edward IV took one look at all of that and then just completely ignored it. Today, we're going to look at the scandalous, dramatic, and politically disastrous marriage of Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville, a king with everything to prove and a crown that wasn't exactly nailed down, and a Lancastrian widow with 2 children, no dowry, and a family that everyone at court loved to hate. And yet, against all odds, they were married for nearly 2 decades, and their union changed the course of history. So who was Elizabeth Woodville? Well, Elizabeth Woodville was not supposed to end up as a queen. She was the daughter of Sir Richard Woodville, a former knight who had risen through service to the crown, and Jacquetta of Luxembourg, who had been married to the Duke of Bedford, uncle of Henry VI. Jacquetta's noble pedigree was excellent. Richard's was not so much, though. Jacquetta's marriage to Richard was similar to Catherine of Valois when she married Owen Tudor. It was one of these things that after her first husband died, she then married for love. And so that is how she got married to Richard Woodville. Together, the two of them had a famously large family, 15 children in total. And while Jacquetta's royal blood gave the family some social weight, they were still seen as upstarts. Elizabeth Woodville's first marriage had been to Sir John Grey of Groby, a Lancastrian who died fighting for Henry VI at the Battle of St. Albans. That left Elizabeth a young widow, probably in her early 20s, with 2 sons to support and some very sticky legal issues around their inheritance. She needed help, and in 1464 she set out to ask the new king, as one does. Edward IV had only recently taken the throne after defeating Henry VI. He was young, charismatic. He had riz, as my daughter likes to say, and at least
Don't say
that. And
the youngins like that.
as the youngins like to say, and at least officially he was unmarried. According to later legend, Elizabeth met him beneath an oak tree at Whittlebury Forest with her sons in tow and pleaded for their lands to be restored. The story goes that Edward was instantly smitten, tried to seduce her, and was firmly rebuffed. In one version, she held a dagger to her throat and told him she'd rather die than dishonor herself. So the tree did exist. The Queen's Oak stood near Pottersbury until it fell in 1997. Whether or not any of that is true, what we do know is that within a matter of weeks, Edward was making regular visits to the Woodville home at Grafton. And soon after that, they were secretly married. The wedding took place on May 1st, 1464, May Day, an auspicious date for lovers. It happened quietly at the Woodvilles' home, possibly at the chapel at Groby, with only Elizabeth's mother, Jacquetta, and a small number of attendants present. No royal proclamation, no council approval, no public ceremony, just a king, a widow, and a priest. To say this was unconventional is a massive understatement. Kings did not marry commoners, especially not ones who came with baggage, especially not ones who had children. Elizabeth was at least 5 years older than Edward. She was a mother of 2, and worst of all, in the eyes of the Yorkist court, she was a Lancastrian. She brought no dowry, no foreign alliance, and no new lands. What she did bring was fertility, already proven, and an extensive family who were very eager to benefit from her new status. Edward kept the marriage secret for several months. At the time, his chief advisor and cousin Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, the so-called kingmaker, was deep in negotiations to arrange a diplomatic marriage between Edward and Bona of Savoy, the sister-in-law of the French king. So you can imagine how that conversation went when Edward finally told him that he had already married a knight's widow from Northamptonshire. When Edward finally revealed the marriage that autumn, his council was stunned, stupefied, not just surprised, furious. Warwick, who had just returned from France thinking he was negotiating this royal wedding, now found out that the king had secretly married a Lancastrian widow. In political terms, it was a slap in the face. Warwick had built his entire strategy on diplomatic alliances and his own influence over Edward. Now the king had bypassed him entirely and handed an enormous amount of influence to the Woodvilles. Within months, Elizabeth's relatives began receiving titles, marriages, and offices. Her brother John married the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, who was in her 60s. Another brother, Lionel, got a bishopric. Her sisters were paired off with nobles, sometimes at the expense of Warwick's own kin or political allies. Even though much of this advancement came from Edward himself, the entire Woodville family was soon viewed as greedy, opportunistic, and dangerously powerful. And of course, there were whisperings that Elizabeth had bewitched the king. That's not metaphorical. She and her mother, Jacquetta, were accused, seriously and repeatedly, of using sorcery to ensnare Edward. The charge was, of course, never proven. Jacquetta was actually tried and cleared, but the idea stuck around, and when Richard III came to power nearly 2 decades later, he would recycle the same accusation. So did they marry for love? Well, maybe. Edward was certainly impulsive and famously fond of women. He was said to be the most handsome man in Europe at the time, and the contemporary accounts do suggest a very strong personal connection. But it would be naive to think that there weren't any other considerations. Marrying Elizabeth helped Edward to distance himself from Warwick and signal that he was going to rule in his own way. She might have been a Lancastrian, but her mother was from Luxembourg, and the marriage did help to win over some of the old Lancastrian loyalists. Still, this wasn't how things were done. Royal marriages were public, they were political. By choosing a domestic bride, especially one without a title, a dowry, or any kind of powerful foreign relatives, Edward broke with every expectation of medieval kingship. And while the marriage may have worked on a personal level, the fallout would echo for years and years and years. Then there's the infamous Precontract allegation. In 1483, after Edward's sudden death, his eldest son, Edward V, was set to inherit the throne. But before his coronation could happen, Edward's younger brother, Richard of Gloucester, claimed that Edward VI's marriage to Elizabeth had been invalid all along. According to this story, Edward had already been pre-contracted, essentially informally married, to another noblewoman, Lady Eleanor Butler, before he wed Elizabeth. If that's true, it would have made all of Edward's children illegitimate and ineligible for the crown, which would mean that the crown would go to the next person in line, which was conveniently Richard. The man who made this claim was a Richard Stillington, a Bishop of Bath and Wells. Not exactly a household name, and conveniently, Eleanor Butler was already dead by this point, so she couldn't confirm or deny it. Neither could Edward, of course, because he was also dead. The alleged pre-contract had never been raised during Edward's reign. Not in 1464, when the marriage was announced, not during the rebellion of Warwick and the Duke of Clarence in the 1470s, not even in Warwick's earlier attempts to discredit Elizabeth and the Woodvilles. It only surfaced when Richard needed a reason to take the throne. It's hard to avoid the conclusion that the pre-contract story was more political fiction than legal fact. But either way it worked. Richard declared Edward's sons illegitimate, had himself crowned Richard III, and locked the boys in the Tower of London, where they were last seen that summer. So, was the marriage between Edward and Elizabeth valid? Legally, yes. Secret marriages weren't ideal, but they weren't invalid either. There was a priest, there were witnesses, and the couple stayed married for 19 years. If there had truly been a prior pre-contract, it could and likely would have been dealt with long before Richard decided to weaponize it. What Edward's marriage to Elizabeth did do, though, was prove just how disruptive a love match could be at the highest level of power. The resentment that it caused helped to fuel decades of factionalism. It gave Warwick the Kingmaker a reason to turn traitor. It provided Richard III with the excuse that he needed to seize the crown, and it set the stage for the Tudor dynasty, born out of Elizabeth's daughter's marriage to Henry VII. But despite the scandal, the gossip, and the political blowback, Edward never attempted to annul his marriage. He never wavered in keeping Elizabeth as his queen. And when he died, he asked to be buried beside her at Windsor. Whatever brought them together, love or fancying each other or politics or all three, it was definitely a union that neither of them ever abandoned. So there you go, a little bit on the marriage between Elizabeth Woodville and Edward IV. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, I sure would appreciate a press of that like button. You know what it does. It helps to feed that algorithm and get our content to more people. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, I hope I earned your subscription where I put out videos like this on the regular. If you want to keep watching content on Edward and his loves, here is a video on Jane Shore, who was Edward's most famous mistress. That might be interesting. Or here is a video that YouTube thinks you'll enjoy. Thanks so much for being with me here today. Thank you for watching. Remember, you are deeply loved. I'm so glad I share the planet with you. I will be back very soon, and don't forget to drink your water, friend. All right, bye-bye.